everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is PJ Beninati. I'm the chair of the Maryland Forward Party. For those of you maybe less familiar with Forward Party, we are a new but quickly growing political organization forming up across the country and also here in Maryland. We are dedicated to identifying and then solving really locally focused community issues through a bottom-up problem-solving approach. We are intentionally looking to move away from top-down. We see challenges when we have a one-size-fits-all kind of policy solution, and we think that reaching out to our communities, learning what those issues are, and then targeting nuanced solutions to those issues is an approach that I think we kind of need in our communities right now. For us, this really boils down to more listening, more voices at the table, and solving problems without unintentionally making other problems worse. That brings us to tonight. We are so pleased to have four amazing guests join us tonight. We're going to be diving deeper into a pretty important issue here, one that's not going away anytime soon: money in politics. Unfortunately, this is not new for any of us, and it's a reality of where we are in this day and age. It's been brought to kind of the limelight and heavily exposed over the last couple of years. You know, when we see somebody like Elon Musk very publicly dangling their wallet to help influence whether it's the President of the United States or Congress or future campaigns that may not quite align with his views, made it known how that money could potentially influence our democracy. We're also not naive to the fact that money is needed where we are right now to stay competitive, to build infrastructure, to run campaigns. We need it. All of our speakers have had different interactions with the role of money in politics. And that's what we want to hopefully dive into tonight. What happens when the next Elon comes down the road and were to offer any of us $1 million tomorrow? How do we all remain committed to community up problem solving while acknowledging these very real constraints, budgetary needs? These are some of the questions we're diving in tonight. I'd like to introduce you all to Pete Oliver Kruger. Pete is our vice chair of the Maryland Forward Party. He's also our co-chair of our Outreach and Engagement Committee, and will be walking us through this panel discussion tonight. Thank you, Pete.
Sure. Thank you, PJ. So this is our topic for tonight for the big money in politics and addressing this. But we're going to use a very special kind of debate that most of you have maybe not seen before. It's just starting to make the rounds. And we tend to like it a little bit better than the other different forms of debate. In a traditional debate, you get a couple minutes, or maybe it's 5 minutes, or for each side to sort of deliver their point, and then the other person delivers their point, and the other person delivers their point. But with that process and how things have been going so far, the debates have really not been, at least to our eyes, providing the value that we're looking for to get from a debate. So we are trying out and testing out new debate formats aimed to give you better information about the topics and where everybody is presenting and insights that everybody can share. And so that is the goal of what we're trying to get here. And so one of the things that we can find is that if people focus on solutions, particularly if they focus on a single solution at a time, you implement that first solution and you solve some problems, and then they go on to the next solution, and oftentimes that next solution can undo the work of the first solution, or it might generate some brand new problems. And when we focus on these things one at a time, we can end up making the whole situation a whole lot worse. So what we are trying to do with a prioritized problems debate is to identify the problems that we want to solve first, and agree on what those problems are. And usually that ends up being a lot easier to do. But we also want to put them in order. And you're going to see what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves the question of which problem should we not make worse when solving other problems? And that is really at the core of this. So as a result, we end up hearing from a lot of more different voices. We encourage bringing in a lot of diverse thinking. As you can see, our panel comes from a variety of different backgrounds. It's going to give us the ability to hear a bunch of different ideas all mixed together so that we can come to the best conclusions as to what we want to do and not assume that one size fits all, but that we can have multiple different solutions to this problem. So what you're going to see is each of our panelists is going to present a problem statement, not a solution. So we're not going to talk about solutions in the early stages of the vote. We're just going to debate problems. So we're going to talk about the problem. We're going to present the problem. We're going to compare those problems next to each other. We're going to ask each other questions, like which problem should we not make worse? Is this more important problem or is this a less important problem? And that's going to be the source of our debate. And we're going to end up with an order of those things. So after they present that problem for 2 minutes, then everybody here can then ask clarifying questions if there's something that you don't understand. You can even make a suggestion or a change to the wording of their problem statement if you think there's a better way that we could capture it that's more to the heart of the issue or the problem. You could offer your support for the idea. I think that should fit into this slot, or you can offer your support for one of the other items and maybe say that that should not fit into that slot. The other thing that we will do at the very end is that we are going to take a vote. So we're going to fire up the vote, the machine inside of Zoom. We're actually going to give you a ranked choice voting kind of approach so that you can list each of the various different positions, and you're going to vote yourselves here in the meeting as to where you think that problem statement should be positioned. All right. So that's going to be our thing. So everybody's going to get about 30 seconds per response, although the panelist who's presenting the problem is going to start with 2 minutes. We are going to go through, I'm going to call the names of the other panelists to give an initial response before we move on to opening up the floor to everybody else. But that, I think, is mostly what we're going through. So again, our guiding principle here is we should not make a higher order problem worse when solving a lower order problem. So you'll see me as a facilitator ask that question. You may also see me bring in just a point of format that if somebody presents or talks about a solution, I may talk about separating out the problem from the solution so we can discuss the problems first. And we will keep this moving, so you can use your raise hand thing at the bottom of your window. Sometimes it's under the React button, so if you have an older version of Zoom, click on that React button and it'll pop up and you'll see an option to raise your hand. If you have some of the newer forms of Zoom, the React button will be right there visible in front of you so that you can just click on that right away. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So first up in our order is going to be Andy Ellis. So Andy Ellis is a resident of Northeast Baltimore. Was a former Towson University debate team member and coach, so we expect great things from him. And he once coached the Tigers to a national championship in 2008. He is the former co-chair of the Baltimore City and the Maryland Green Parties, and is also a current co-chair of the Green Party for the U.S. Coordinated Campaign Committee. He's also a candidate for governor, seeking the Green Party nomination, and he also served on the Baltimore City Charter Commission in 2023 and 2024. All right, Tonya Sweat is a licensed attorney in D.C., Maryland, and South Carolina, as well as several federal courts. She is a veteran, a former federal civil servant, and an entrepreneur. And she's the managing member of Sweatism Consulting, LLC. She was a former director with Maryland Forward and was a two-time candidate for Prince George's County Executive and was endorsed by us at the Maryland Forward Party. So she is a wife, a mom, an advocate for democracy, civil rights, and education. Third up that we're adding to our panel is going to be Delegate Kevin Hornberger. So Delegate Hornberger serves the Maryland House of Delegates representing District 35B, which includes most of the population centers in North Cecil County. Delegate Hornberger has extensive experience on the Ways and Means Committee, where he serves as the Deputy Minority Whip, and has successfully passed legislation on a variety of topics, including but not limited to election law, gaming, and natural resources. Delegate Hornberger has played a key role in several local undertakings as well, most notably the opening of the Perry Point Veterans Village in 2018. And has a background in facility management and holds a degree in mechanical engineering from UDC. Currently resides in Northeast Maryland. Our fourth panelist, adding to the spotlight here, is Nicole Hassannia. So Nicole represents our concerned constituents out there. Was born and raised and educated in Maryland, currently lives in our state capital of Annapolis with her husband and 4 children, all of which are also educated in Maryland public schools. She's an entrepreneur of 2 Maryland-run businesses, Aerospace BD, HD Enterprises, and an investor in local venues and in local people. And she considers herself a party agnostic and enthusiast for everything we want to do. Now we're going to get into the debate. We're getting into the presentation here. So the core topic here is about this sense of big money in politics, like PJ was talking about. So we are putting one problem here up on the board, which is that the system is designed such that to enact substantial political reform will require a lot of money. So most of the folks here are presenting some problems maybe that are in contrast to this and are going to be weighed against this problem system. But I won't say anything more about this. Let's go ahead and launch in. So Andy, you are up first. Would you like to give us your presentation? Adam's going to put 2 minutes on the clock.
Sure. So my problem statement is that large single donors can get in the way of establishing the truly representative multi-party democracy that I think would better serve voters. And I thought about this when I saw Andrew Yang go on CNN and talk about how excited he was to have the Forward Party be on the scene and have a multi-party system, and then how excited he was to talk to Elon Musk about Elon Musk's involvement in that. I got a little bit worried. And so here's sort of my point on this. Campaign finance reform is not going to occur in a meaningful way in the two-party system. The system is too good for the party elites and too good for the donors in order for either of them to agree to change campaign finance reform as it is right now. There may be some individuals who want to do it in either party, but the parties and the donors are simply not going to allow us to reform that system right now. And if we do want and so we're going to need to have some sort of reform to have that. But if that reform is shaped by the ultra wealthy, it is likely to serve the interests of those folks and not of the broader public. And so I think that there's a really good example that Jack Santucci gives in his book, More Parties or No Parties, about electoral reform in the United States. And he talks about the 1913 referendum in LA, where the electoral reform movement was going to put a proportional representation, party-based reform on the ballot, and they got it on the ballot and they almost won until the wealthy donors came in and killed it. And then after that, they co-opted the electoral reform movement in order to move us away from multi-party reforms and toward nonpartisan reforms. That basically stalled electoral reform in the United States for about 40 years until we got to the 1950s and the current two-party system as we know it was enshrined. So I think we can see an example of a moment in time where there was a possibility for a transformative change, and then the electoral reform got co-opted by wealthy folks, and I think there's a real risk of that right now.
All right, so we are going to position these statements relative to each other, and so that's what this screen is going to be for in listing these prioritized problems. So I have to ask Andy here, what position do you wish? So the goal is to not make a higher order problem worse when solving a lower order problem. So what position would you like to position your problem in this list?
Pete, I'm going to say I want number two. I think that the problem that you have identified about the need for substantial money to have political reform is the highest order problem, and then I think mine is the second.
All right. So we're moving that into position 2. Okay, so we are going to go to Tonya first, and then we will head to Kevin and Nicole, and then we will open up to the floor. You have the options. You can see it down here at the screen. You can ask a question. You can suggest an edit to the language here, or you can argue for or against. Tonya.
I have a question and I want to suggest an edit. So my question to Andy is, why would you say only large single donors would get in the way, and not include political action committees or any large donation, no matter the number of donors, considering Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission basically said political action committees are not limited in the amount of money that they can spend in our politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, Tonya, and I'm open to hear your edit on this. But I think my sort of thought here is that somebody with several $100 billion can shape the agenda more than by funneling money through a PAC than somebody without several $100 billion can. So I think PACs are the problem, and I think the ability of PACs, I think those type of unregulated PACs are probably the problem, but I think somebody with $400 billion can more effectively get the PAC to do what he wants than a group of people who collectively have $400 billion.
All right, thank you for the response. Okay, Kevin, you are up next.
Okay, well, first off, or did you want to do Nicole next?
Nope, you are up next. I'm just queuing up Nicole after you.
Okay, great. Well, first I'd like to start off by just thanking you guys for having me on this. It means a lot to be able to speak to a diversified audience and debate this important topic. And then secondly, I want to preface all my comments with, I don't want anything that's said today to discourage anyone out there that's listening to not run for office, right? At the end of the day, this is a competitive system. We want to encourage everyone who feels, necessary to run or wants to make a change, that nothing should get in their way, right? If we want to live in a free society, everyone should be able to run as long as they meet the simplified requirements. So my point that I've drawn up here, and this largely speaks to what I'll call statewide races, maybe federal races as well, is that if you want to be a
quick question in here. So, I appreciate the acknowledgments here. We're just responding to Andy's post here. So, did you have any thoughts or questions for Andy's problem statement?
Yeah. So, we obviously have the Supreme Court mandate, and what I would say is that in Maryland, for example, I'll use some anecdotes here, is that we do have strict caps on PAC participation as well as contribution limits. And, what we're finding is that these are very difficult to enforce. So as long as the state is willing to put adequate dollars into the enforcement of these and then go after these bad actors, because in many instances they're out of state, it makes it more encouraging for folks to run because they know that the system is being watched. So I think that there's ways to get there, but we've got to be willing to put forward money to do it.
All right. Nicole, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Andy's position here of single donors being second in the list around the system design? Do you have any thoughts too, or any questions?
Well, of course, I agree with it. It's. I hope everybody agrees with something like that. I myself live in the state's capital, right outside the nation's capital, and have come up through the ranks, I guess, to afford to live there. And being in the area, I have seen some influential behavior, even under my own nose in my own neighborhood. So personally, and somebody that practices empiricism, I have learned the goodwill of our political system isn't so good all the time.
All right. So now the floor is open. So anybody here can raise your hand, and you have 30 seconds. You can raise your hand multiple times, but we'll probably allow other people to talk so that we go through that. So does anybody else want to offer a thought or opinion about Andy's proposal?
I would just jump in and ask a clarifying question. Unlimited dollars going into a candidate, obviously a major concern. Unlimited dollars going into the formation of a new party or a movement, obviously it can adapt or live on past that initial founder. So just to clarify, you're advocating for caps or limits on sort of both of these expenditures? What would you clarify on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're gonna get caps on either of those things in a meaningful way, as long as we have a two-party system, in which both parties have arranged good relationships with the donors. So I think I'm pointing out a problem here, which is that like the good electoral reform that the Forward Party is moving toward recently, I think is at risk in a world in which Elon Musk pours $100 billion into it and vastly changes the equation. So I think like for me, the right kind of electoral reform is one that allows multiple parties to exist and represent as many perspectives as possible. And I worry that one person putting $100 billion into that electoral reform movement is going to narrow the type of reforms that we can get to reforms that serve his interests.
Thank you.
All right. Bill, I see a hand up.
Question, to what extent is the freedom of speech, how do we limit a PAC expressing their opinion?
We don't in the United States right now. In the United States right now, PACs are going to be able to express their opinion as they see fit. I think my concern is more for the people who are with the Forward Party here with this to be careful about how they let their movement be shaped by the allure of one person who's willing to pour dollars into it. I think that person will do that because it serves his interests. We have seen that person use government and those donations to serve his interests. So I don't think there is a way to limit these things right now. Citizens United is law of the land, and neither of the two parties are going to do anything in Congress in order to change that right now. But I think that individuals who are in leadership positions in organizations can be cautious about how they interact with those things.
All right. Next up, I see Tonya and then 71 Pan, which I think was Michael.
I'm going to suggest the edit. I've been chewing on whether I really wanted to do it, but I am going to suggest it. And it's simple. I would say delete the single. And I say that because on the federal level, I remember when the Koch brothers started investing a lot of money into our politics. It wasn't one brother, it was two brothers. And then we have the political action committees. And if you say one person can't donate a lot of money, all they're going to do is just put a bunch of people together and do it as a group collectively. In Maryland, I'm going to pick on this state and I'm going to do it briefly. We do have a limit of $6,000 per donor. But I've seen one single donor with a lot of money donate a lot of money to a candidate and put everybody's name in his house on those donations to avoid or get around that limit. So I think large donors, period, should be the statement and take out the word single.
Yeah, I'm good with that edit.
All right. That word is removed. All right, Michael, you are up.
Yes, thank you. So regarding the large donors, being a impediment to having a true democracy, like what Ellis said, but what's not being overstated as a problem because citizens in the state, pay taxes every year to the government, and I feel like they don't have a direct say. What if the state or the citizens introduce a ballot initiative to amend the state constitution where citizens have a direct say in how special interest groups can fund campaigns and give the votes to the residents because the residents are impacted by laws every day more than politicians, and the politicians are supposed to listen to the residents because the residents vote for politicians in office moving forward. In other words, it's about having a referendum.
All right. Andy, any thoughts?
I think referendum is something that we should absolutely have in Maryland, or citizen initiative is something we should absolutely have in Maryland. I think if we had it, it would allow us to potentially do some campaign finance reform, but I'm not sure that it would be legal for the state of Maryland to do much more than what Citizens United does or what it already does right now. So I largely agree that we need referendum or that we need citizen initiative. I don't know that it solves this problem without congressional action.
All right. Now, point of order here that I want to sort of list here. So if we put large donors down below enacting substantial political reform, what we're saying with this order here is that if there is a substantial reform, it might be okay to not solve this problem because it's at a lower position. Now, from the things that I'm hearing, I'm not offering an opinion one way or another, but from what I think I'm hearing, I think what you're proposing is that large donors should not be allowed in order to enact sufficient or substantial political reform. Is that correct?
I don't know if that seems like a solution to me. Like the problem, I think that the problems are in the right order. The system is designed to require large amounts of money to get the kind of political reform it would need to solve campaign finance issues, and large donors can shape that in the way that they want. So, I mean, I hear you. And when we get to solutions, we can talk about it, but I think it does make sense to put them in that, to have the problems in that order.
All right, I just wanted to clarify. Okay, let us move on to our next panelist. So Tonya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pete. My problem statement is big money in politics makes politicians not responsive or accountable to the poor, underserved, and or apathetic voters. And I find that to be a problem because when you look at the wealth in the nation right now, 10% of the top households in this country hold 2/3 of the nation's wealth. And the rest of us are fighting for what's left, the crumbs, if you will. And that's a problem when you say we're a democratic society that elects representatives who are supposed to advocate for and legislate or implement and execute the will of the majority of the people. The majority of the money is held by a very large minority. And when you allow them to use their wealth to wield control and influence over our political system, those of us who can't match their dollars don't get the same voice. We don't get the same representation. We don't even get the same access to our elected officials. And I think that is a huge problem right now in the country's politics. I've heard elected officials say they don't even canvass or attempt to campaign in some communities because they just know they're not going to vote or they're not going to donate. And that's not what a representative democracy is supposed to reflect or be about. And so I honestly think this is one of the biggest problems and probably should be the number one problem with big money in our politics, because it obviously has changed how our elected officials represent us, whether it's at the district level, the state level, or even the local level.
All right, so you are proposing to send this up to position number 1?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right, we're going to do that. Sorry, give me one moment. Oops. All right, so vote is for position number 1. Okay, so we are going to go to Kevin first, then Nicole, then Andy. So if you agree, then you agree that putting a focus on being accountable to the poor, underserved, and apathetic voters is more important than raising sufficient money or substantial reform, that everything must take underneath that position. Or if you are against this, what you're saying is that there may be some things where we have to maybe not directly serve the poor, underserved, and apathetic voters first in order to get something else done of substantial political reform.
Great, thanks. Yeah, two points that I want to make is one, we have to make voting accessible to folks that are at all rungs of the ladder. That's step one. And so anywhere there's a place where folks are finding it difficult to vote, or need, increased transportation or don't have access to things like mail-in ballots, et cetera, those put folks at a disadvantage based on their monetary level. So that's step one. Step two is the candidates themselves. We have to increase voter turnout. So things that increase turnout, I'm pro for, and I think that's more to the solution. But those folks have to vote. They have to vote, or else the politicians won't seek out their input. Thanks.
All right. So it sounds like you are in favor of this position.
I am. I think it's an accurate statement.
Okay, Nicole, you're up next, and then Andy.
Yeah, I understand where she's going with this position. I did want to point out all U.S. citizens have the opportunity to vote, including the poor. Everyone has one vote, poor and rich. Couldn't the poor bind together to impact their influence? Are they collaborating on educating their communities on facts, ways to change these outcomes? And not all politicians are manipulated by money per se. Could you make your problem statement less binary and divisive and soften your approach? For example, big money in politics may make politicians not responsive. And I know some really cool people in politics that aren't like this. So I don't like to put everyone in a bucket. I don't like people doing it to me, and I don't do it to other people.
And I appreciate that perspective, Nicole, and absolutely, I will accept that edit.
Yeah.
You're correct. Being now classified a politician myself, I'm more of a grassroots kind of gal. So you're right. I'm not.
You're one of the good ones. Look at that. You're not one of them.
Yeah, I try to be.
Yeah. Good ones.
All right. Thank you both. Andy, you're up next.
All right, let me offer two things here. The first is that I think that there is really good study on this that says it in fact does make it so that politics is not responsive to people. I think there's a Princeton study that came out a couple of years ago that says that politicians almost never do what the public wants, they do what the donors want. So I do think that there's truth in the statement. The other thing I would say is if we're not solving gerrymandering and other things like that, specifically in Maryland, it's not going to solve the responsiveness problem. So I would suggest that this goes below the system reform ones and drops to position number 3.
All right. So that is a proposal for Tonya that you may accept or not accept. Do you want to switch positions and move it down, or do you want to leave it at number 1?
Understand and definitely appreciate where Andy is coming from. And I wish in my heart of hearts that voters were more knowledgeable on the system itself. And I think if our voters were more intelligent and had more courage to speak out against a lot of what we see in politics, I would be more amenable to accepting that suggestion. But understanding that not all voters operate that way, it's hard for me to move it down as a priority.
All right. What I like about this discussion is it's hard to tell which one's causing the other. But addressing one can cause another problem, and addressing the first one can make the other problem worse. And that's why we're here talking about these things. All right, the floor is open. So if anybody would like to chime in, go ahead and raise your hands. Michael, you are up first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I just heard from Delegate Kevin Hornberger that the way that we can make voting easier is by making it accessible. My question is this: what do we mean by accessibility when it comes to transportation? Because not everybody has time to vote on election day. Because most employers don't grant employees paid time off just to vote for one day. Whereas in other countries, when people vote for their prime ministers, right, or parliamentarians. They're giving the right to vote. So I'm just curious to know what would a paid voting day would look like, so that people who do vote, because there are a lot of people with low income and they can't afford to lose a day of not working, because in in America or in other states, most people work in like have at will employment. So I'm
Yeah.
just wondering what would remedies look like to make it easy for people to vote on the especially at the state level, because people can afford to lose
Yeah. I
or work
appreciate.
days.
Yeah, Michael, I totally appreciate that question. We are going to come back at the end and we're going to talk about solutions and the specific solutions that we can use to list on this. So I want to hold off on that, but there was a question to you, Kevin. Is there anything that you would like to respond to as far as that accessibility, making that problem a larger problem or a lower problem?
Yeah, great question. And in Maryland, we've taken bipartisan strides to make it easier. Most noteworthy being the mail-in voting. If you remember in the previous two presidential cycles, there was this whole divide of one side likes to mail-in vote better than the other. The facts didn't bore that out. We see similar mail-in voting levels on both the D and R side, and even amongst the independents. However, not all states are embracing this. So I think that when you combine early voting, you combine multiple precinct locations, and then you also mail-in voting, that makes it so that anyone, regardless of your income strata or your location, has the ability to vote. So I think we're doing a good job in Maryland. I think it needs to be scaled up to the rest of the country.
All right. Tonya, you're next up, and then Andy.
Yep, I just wanted to add to that comment. The accessibility also goes to access to the candidates, not just voting. One thing we find is if candidates aren't able to raise big money, they don't always get the big spotlights. They don't get invited to some of the debates. They don't get the TV time. They don't get the radio time. And so while voters may want to vote, whether you're poor or not, whether you have a mail-in ballot or not, they don't vote because they don't always know who the candidates are, what their platforms are, what they're talking about. Because if you don't have the money to buy the time, you don't get the media space.
I like that distinction. Andy, you're up.
Yeah, two things here. One, I agree as a third-party candidate. I absolutely agree with you on the debate point. And Delegate Hornberger, I would love to come and talk to you about some ways to solve that here in Maryland. I think there's legislative solutions to that. The second thing I would say is that I think that the responsiveness problem goes beyond money. The responsiveness problem in a state like Maryland, where only 4 Senate districts were within 10 points and only like a couple of House districts were competitive, comes from the lack of competitive elections as much as it does from money. So if we have places where the person who wins the primary is insured to win the general election, that also increases the lack of responsiveness.
Fair enough. All right. We still got another minute on our overall time clock for this thing. Bill, were there any statements or questions inside of chat that we want to add into our conversation?
Not this time.
All right. So just go down to the section there about Tonya's problem and put your vote in. What position do you think Tonya's problem should be in? Should it be in position 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? You can pick any of those positions. All right. As I tabulate the votes, let's go on to the next problem statement. Kevin, go ahead and present your issue.
Thanks so much. So my issue that I've brought to the table here is above a certain level, you cannot run without money, and oftentimes that keeps good people from running for office. So just to clarify that a little bit more, whenever you're running for office, you want to have a touch point with all of the folks that are in your district that you're potentially going to vote for you. So obviously above a certain point, the window of time that you have, it's just impossible to reach everyone. So that leads to you having to raise money and reach them through other means, whether it's paid advertisements, a commercial, a radio spot, paper mailers, and the like. So if we look to races that are, let's say, statewide, a congressional seat, U.S. Senate, These are just, from a financial standpoint, prohibitive against entry-level candidates or folks that can't raise adequate money in a short period of time, which is usually around a year, to be able to be competitive. I think, last time I checked, the average for a congressional seat anywhere in America is around $1 million. So this is a significant amount of money, and it acts as an impediment to have competitive elections, and that's really what our system was founded on. So it's a concern. There are some ways to kind of pad that and take away, but what we're seeing more often than not is that wealthy self-funders and folks that are aligned with large corporations, for example, are having much better odds, far and away, getting in office and then staying in office.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, the results of the vote. It was a tie between, interestingly enough, position 1 and position 3, and position 3 got the most votes. So this was the vote for where we are right now. So now, Kevin, where do you want to position your problem statement?
Oh, well, that's a tough one, because I always like to vote for myself in an election. I'd say right there in the middle, whether it be 2 or 3.
Okay. All right. So do you think this is a larger problem than serving the poor, underserved, apathetic voters? And if you put in position 2, you're moving it up to above large donors.
Mm-hmm. What I like about, because I'm an engineer and I try to think about this in a methodical way, what I like about Andy's position is that he's really addressing the foundation of it, which is the party structure. And sort of, that's the first level of entry into an election, is how you're identifying or what group you're associated with.
Okay.
So that's why I think this is good to be sort of there in the middle.
All right. So you like that right here. Okay.
Yep.
There's our spots. Okay, so now we can hear the responses here, and you can try to convince Andy to move it up and down, as well as you can try to convince the voters to position Kevin's spot in one place or another at the end. Okay, so we are first going to go to Nicole, then Andy, then Tonya, then we'll go out to the audience. So Nicole, you're up first.
Well, I agree with Kevin, of course. It's some of the research that I actually did to prepare for this argument, or not argument, debate, to prioritize our problems. But I don't really have anything to add other than you are a state a legislative race, and that you spent anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 on your race, Kevin. So congratulations on raising that much money, or I'm not sure if you had it yourself.
Yeah, I'm actually below that. I'm in the 20,000 range.
You got it for a steal.
Yeah, but I, you can assuage these things by working hard and door knocking. I will say that probably your delegate, your state rep, and maybe even Senate is sort of the upper limit of how far you can go with sweat equity. Above that, it gets very expensive. But very astute point.
Yes.
Okay. Andy, you're up next, and then Tonya.
Yeah. Okay. So I would propose a quick edit here, which is cannot win without money, which keeps good people from running for office. And then I want to say I am a third-party candidate running for statewide office, and I'm not a wealthy person. So I absolutely agree with you that the barriers are there. And I think they're especially there for people who are not in the sort of dominant party within the state. So as a Green Party candidate, it's acutely true for me, but I also think it's true for Republicans that are running in Democratic districts in a lot of ways, and I think it goes back to the two-party system that we have.
All right, Kevin, do you want to accept that thing of you cannot win without money?
I'll put the blessing on that. Sounds good.
All right, there we go. Tonya, you are up, and then we will head on out to the audience.
Thank you. I was going to ask a clarifying question. I think the edit itself may actually answer my question, but I'm still going to ask. Kevin, how do you feel about the fact that in the two-party system, I understand, if you don't prove yourself to be a good fundraiser, the parties are not as willing to support you in your race? And while they're supposed to stay out of primaries, recently, that has not been the case. So, again, the money determines a whole lot, from party support to access to media coverage and the like.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what I will say is that on both sides of the aisle here, at least in Maryland, it does give you a significant upper hand if you're raising significant amounts of money. But at the same time, you can exist and you can survive without doing that. It's just a level of how much clout that you want to establish and move up. And this is what I also say too, and this is on both sides. You're not going to be in a leadership position unless you're raising significant amounts of money. That's just the truth on both sides.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go out to the populace here. So what are your thoughts? So basically the position that we're in right now, we're saying we need to focus on getting those large donors out, but then we got to collect enough money in order to win, in order to make any kind of a change. Once we get some good folks in there for running, then we can address the poor, underserved, and apathetic voters. So that's what this order says to me. I'm not offering an opinion, but that's just what the order of problems states. So who's got some thoughts to deliver about the order of these problems? Michael, you're up first, and then Michelle. And Michael, you are on mute.
Oh, sorry. I meant to lower my hand. Sorry, my fault.
Okay.
I'll come back. Okay.
All right, Michelle, did you want to chime in, or do we have any others?
I wasn't actually going to challenge the ranking of where it fell, but I did have a question for Kevin. Is this an appropriate time to ask it?
It is.
Okay. I also am a Green Party member, and I plan on running for House delegate as a Green member. And I was wondering, you're talking about the funding that it takes to run a race on the level that you're talking about, like say $20,000. What happens if there is a primary for someone holding the seat? I mean, what if in this western edge of Maryland, does the Republican Party do like the Democrat Party does and just money out anyone who wants to primary from within their own party?
No, I have to say, I think we've got time there. Thank you.
Yes, so just to quickly answer that, and we have had races where there have been competitive Green Party candidates in both the House delegates and Senate. And I'm also happy to report that in Cecil County, 2 cycles ago, we had someone run on the Libertarian Party as well for the Senate. So, and which I think is awesome. I thought that was a really proud moment to me to see that level of participation where I grew up. And ultimately, it comes down to those candidates have to raise money. You cannot run an effective campaign without money, because someone needs to be able to go to a website. They need to be able to hear your voice. They need to read your campaign mailer. There is just a threshold of dollars that have to be raised in order for you to have an impact. So all the above, whatever position that you're running for, money's crucial, and it should be to a certain level, just so folks know where you stand. It gets sideways when we see these huge influxes of money, especially when they're coming from outside the state.
Okay. I've got Michael, I see a hand up, and then Bill.
Yeah, so Kevin, when you mentioned about at a certain level to win races at the state office that you needed like a certain amount of money to win. And thinking about it, right? Because a lot of time when corporate donors donate money to politics at the state levels, they're not necessarily a resident of that state, and that doesn't make the process, very fair. Because otherwise, focusing too much money, it's going to add more fuel to the fire, and wrapping around the system is not going to work either. And because a lot of young people in the 21st century are tired of seeing money being donated to political candidates every year, and then nothing changes at all at the state level. So I don't think we can say we can wrap around it or work this way incrementally. No, because the system, like you said in the beginning, has been founded for several centuries, and there's no going back to putting caps or to saying we could work around it. There's no way.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you for
just
your
to
insights, Michael.
quickly
Go for it.
answer that.
Yes.
So, look, folks from other places have the ability to make donations, and there's probably not going to be a change in that in the future. The bad actors are the ones that are funneling money through these very large super PACs and the tens of millions of dollars. And in many instances, they might be purely doing so to attack another candidate or to take away from a candidate, for example. And those are the ones of highest concern, right? And we've taken strides in Maryland to go after these bad actors. Some states have not. And as you can imagine, it's difficult because they don't reside here and they're taking these multi-step processes to sort of shield the money and it's in the genesis of said money. So, yes, someone who doesn't live here has the ability to make contributions. We have caps. And in Maryland, they're fairly generous. They're $6,000, which was alluded to earlier. Many states, they're much lower than that. So those are the ways that you can kind of regulate it. But again, you got to have resources to go after these bad actors.
All right, Bill, you're up next, and then Andy.
Thank you. So the system's designed to provide control to two political parties, a duopoly, and can an independent raise substantial money and still have a chance to be elected? I don't think so. And the leaderships of both political parties, one in particular, have said, if I don't like you, you won't even be on the ballot in the primary, regardless of how much money you have. So is the duopoly control more of an issue than having to raise a lot of money? You can raise a lot of money and still not even be on the ballot.
All right, thank you, Bill. Andy.
So I want to say two things. Well, the first is that I think we need to be careful about how we talk about out-of-state money as long as it is coming from individuals, because oftentimes people who are not incumbents or insurgent challengers are going to appeal to a network of folks that might not be in their district or in the state because they may be people they work with or they may be people that they've organized with in the past. So I just think we need to be careful when we're talking about out-of-state money to focus on the big out-of-state money that is trying to change outcomes, not that is trying to support a candidate. I'll just say one thing then, since my time is up. But yeah, just a caution on how we talk about out-of-state money. So,
thank you, Andy. Tonya, you're up next.
I have a question just on this idea. It just occurred to me. One of the things that we do see a lot of in Maryland is the bankrolling, if you will, of multiple campaigns because a candidate saves their money or has a war chest. I wonder, where does that war chest fit into this discussion, especially in light of the fact that recently we've had a number of politicians be convicted for misuse of those war chests.
Yeah, I can respond quickly on that. The one thing that we do well in Maryland is to segregate state level race fundraising from federal. And we actually do a very good job on that. So as you don't have the ability to raise money at this level, let's say it's for a state office, and then sort of make that portable into a federal level or transfer that to federal. That there is a bright line there. In terms of how that money is raised, I will give a tip of the hat to our elections board. They vet donations, they vet donors, and there's been multiple convictions, as you've seen, because of their diligence, whether that's for straw man donations, whether that's for bundlers that are basically accepting money that isn't theirs so that they can make donations. Maryland does a very good job of that. it's again back to what we were talking about with Andy. It's difficult when you have dollars coming in from out of state and it's tens of millions and it's through the super PACs. That's really the bad offenders here. So, but I think that those convictions show that we're being diligent, right?
All right. We are just about at our time, but Andy, if you want to chime in with any last thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say, I want to echo what Kevin is saying, that our State Board of Elections is really top notch when it comes to going after these things, and they use it to help fund public financing for various things, which we can get to as we talk about solutions later in some cases. But I think it's important to understand that we do have a good State Board of Elections that diligently enforces these things on both parties in a pretty effective way, and does what they can to go after the super PAC donations that they think are running afoul of the law.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Michelle.
How do you feel about state parties dumping massive amounts of money to maintain a seat? Or national parties, not just state parties?
I will say that that is something that is in every state. You know, you have the state party, and that's the argument I think that Forward is making here is this whole idea of infrastructure. How can you run up against a group like that has all of these bank accounts and processes in place where they can move money around and kind of keep the situation going? What I will say is that more often than not, people are paying into that state party because they want to keep incumbents there, or they want to perpetuate their access to those incumbents or to those folks that are at those higher echelons of elected office. So those are typically the folks that are donating to a party as opposed to a candidate. And in many instances, they may be doing both. But those parties are really there ultimately to protect incumbents on both sides.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. All right. We're going to try this voting thing. I might have fixed it. Let's see if it happens. If it does, I will apologize to Tonya that I didn't get it fixed before her turn. But vote is open. Are you guys able to vote in this poll? So it stays where it is as Kevin proposed it. Yeah, and that matches with what I'm seeing in chat. So we're good to go. We are heading on to our last problem statement of the evening. So this is from Nicole. You have 2 minutes. What would you like to say about your problem?
Well, thank you for having me. I am actually calling in from Jamaica, which is unusual because I'm segueing into my problem about bias. And here in Jamaica, the vibes are always good. But my problem is we all have bias to our perspective, but people with big money, their bias has a stronger influence over the candidates. Here are 3 reasons why. Number 1, money opens doors. The wealthy have the ability to gain disproportionate meetings and attention from candidates because those candidates want their support. Why do they want their support? Because those wealthy people will likely donate to their respective campaigns and influence others to donate. Number 2, money buys public influence and manipulation. The wealthy have the luxury of funding their own bias-based misinformation campaigns, and I've seen a few of them running around. This could include traditional advertising, social media, fear-mongering, and Maryland's favorite, intimidation. With their money, they could also influence other politicians against a candidate. Some campaigns spend millions in advertising. And number 3, money allows you the chance to campaign effectively. Campaigns are costly, as we have been discussing. According to my AI sources, Maryland's average federal election costs have been millions for House seats and tens of millions or more for Senate seats. Only the wealthy can afford this money, and it discourages others from even attempting to run. I myself would never touch it. This reinforces a political environment dominated by elites and entrenched interests. And to recap, money opens doors, money buys influence, and money allows you to run. End scene.
Cool. All right, so now we're going to have our question of the order. So where would you like to position your statement in this order?
I think bias is a symptom of other things. So I'm going to put it down at 2 or 3. 3.
All right, so you want to put it above Kevin's.
Well, maybe not, because I feel like we're saying some of the same stuff, and I think bias would alleviate after we took care of some of the other things. So I'm going to put it on 3. In my mind, it's number 1, but actually I think for the people as a majority and not just for myself.
Okay, so you want to have it here in position 3. So you're saying large donors. Yeah, there are some connection between this, but you're saying large donors is a larger problem. And then bias is a problem that's inside of that as well. But we should be tackling bias, or at least not making bias worse, while trying to figure out how to raise enough money to help good candidates to win. So does that fit with your understanding of that positioning?
Yes. In other words, I would like to empower Marylanders to think for themselves rather to be, herd mentality from our politicians and just told what to think. So I'm all about facts. I hang out with a bunch of physicists and space nerds, and we just love evidence. And I think bias is all going to erase away once our Marylanders are empowered and made a little bit more intelligent on how to derive, reality versus what our politicians are telling them reality is.
All right. So Andy gets first opportunity to respond, then Tonya, then Kevin, and then we will go to the floor.
Yeah, I think what Nicole is saying here is very right, and I think it is particularly right in the United States. If you look at the other countries that have first past the post elections, like Canada, like Great Britain, like Australia, and like India, there is much more diversity of candidates who are able to run. There are much more diversity of parties who are able to win, and that is because of the money in politics. The money in politics in the U.S. is what cements the system we have in place in a way and makes it so that other people can't break into it. So absolutely, the people with more money have their biases heard and have a stronger influence over the candidates uniquely here in America compared to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Andy. Tonya, and then Kevin.
Where I come from, there's this saying, money talks, BS walks. I'm being ladylike tonight, so I won't tell you what BS means. I hope everybody knows what that means. And I agree with you, Nicole, but I think there's a bias on both sides. We also have to look at the bias of our voters who tend to think that big money means something good. Just because a candidate has a lot of money in the bank doesn't mean that's the best candidate, the most intelligent candidate, or the most experienced. So we have to deal with it from both perspectives when we talk about bias.
Amen.
Are you advocating that she maybe move her problem things down or up?
I think it's good where it is. Yeah. It's going that bias thing is always a challenge because it's about education.
Right.
Right. Okay, Kevin, you're up, and then we'll go to the floor.
Yeah, just quickly, great point. And in Maryland, we've gone so far as to where people can't even participate in our elections, which is to say, if you're not affiliated with a party, then you can't vote. So that's kind of the end result here of what money can do. And until we address that, and we get people participating in primaries, even if they haven't, identified with said party, then this problem is not going to get fixed. So I think it's good. We got to get to the root here. But at the end of the day, I'm a consensus person. Let's put all these together.
All right, Bill, I see a raised hand. You get to be our first person from the floor if you wish.
So two things. So Adam, hope we don't run out of time. First, I would move to make this number 1. To me, it is the biggest problem, and so I would rank it number 1. Secondly, we have an input from the chat, Pete, I wanted to share with you, that the chat says, I think there are similarities between problem statements that could be combined, not now, but perhaps next events, and just combining things would make more sense.
I think that certainly is fair. Yeah, could be an edit suggestion if anybody wants to make it and say, with this edit, I think these two statements become the same statement. Michael, I see a hand up.
Yeah, so just wanted to add what Nicole and Tonya said earlier about, empowering voters, right? And not letting, large donors influence, the election. The problem is that we tried time and time, error by error, with incremental changes, and the incremental changes did not attack the root cause of unlimited influence in state elections in the last, 40, 50 years. And so I think the only way you can get more people to vote is that there's going to have to be a public funding of campaigns and public funded media reporting, because depending on the corporations to influence the outcomes through corporate donors, it's not going to really satisfy young voters, because young voters are not going to wait for change to happen,
All right.
especially contacting the state representatives, because every time they contact the state representatives, 9 out of 10 times they always inform that it's always business as usual. We had to go through chains of go through political process. No, young people are not going to wait, and young people are ready to revolutionize, getting money out of politics.
All right.
We've seen it for so many decades, and something's going to happen.
Very true, Michael. Sorry, I have to give a chance for other people to chime in if they wish to. And if nobody else wants to chime in, we can come back to you. All right. Any other thoughts that people wanted to toss in? We got Andy, we got Bill.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think this point about not being able to vote in primaries for people who are in political parties that are not recognized or independents is really important, and it is part of the structural reform that we need to make if we want to be able to address this problem. I think the structural things come over the personal things. I think the personal things we feel more, but I think the things that we feel more come because of the structural things.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Bill, and then we'll go back to Michael.
I propose an amendment to take Nicole's statement and add on to it the end of Andy's statement. So, their biases are stronger influence over the candidates, which could get in the way of establishing truly representative multi-party democracy. I think those two together, really belong together.
I'm going to type something in, and then you get the choice to add this or not.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can write it better than I typed it.
I'm fine with that.
So what do you think, Nicole? Do you want to add this to your statement? It is your choice.
I love collaborating with other people. So of course, if that's an idea, and I think that also Andy, Nicole, Kevin, Tonya, I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. So if we could merge them all together, I think that would be great. So of course, I agree.
You're okay with that? Good. Okay. All right, Michael, we can come back to you.
Sir, thank you so much. Yeah, so I would put, I believe that Andy's, when Andy said large donors could get in the way of establishing truly represented multi-party democracy, Nicole's, I feel like Andy and Nicole's could be combined together, because they're attacking the root cause of, of political elections, political elections in every election cycle, because yes, there's biases, especially from large donors who are preventing third-party and independent candidates from running for office because they lack the funds or they lack name recognitions. And we need to move beyond name recognition, because having a name recognition, especially if you've been a state representative for 40 plus years, it's not going to mean anything to young people today, especially among millennials, Gen Zers. And if we look at the New York election, Zandini, why he won not because of name recognition. He won because the people are just tired of the status quo. They're tired of money influencing incumbents, money influencing past politicians, returning to office, and they don't want to see the system to monitor, checks and balances. And sometimes the checks and balances don't do a good job of monitoring political contributions come from
Yeah,
corporate donors, and so corporate donors need to go forever. Period.
I hear
But
you.
in
So
terms of the,
one of the things I'm seeing, Michael, is a thing that often happens when we get into these conversations is new problems start to bubble up. And so when we do this process internally and we use this one, we just
right,
keep adding it to the list. We keep putting it in there. We combine things together. We move it around, and it ends up to be a very important way to sort of get these to get to the right issues because we will often forget and miss
right, I
key
get that.
aspects.
Right, I understand, but you also have to consider in the last 40, 50 years, going back to the founding of America, if you don't consider the history of this country, how will you know as
Yep.
citizens we're going to make the right decisions? Because we always forget about history, and we're doomed to repeat history every year. And this is what
Yeah.
this election has demonstrated to us. History is going to repeat itself.
Michael, I do very much appreciate your insights, the history that you have, the knowledge that you have to bring into this conversation.
Right,
One of
I'm
the
not
things
adding
that
to
we
the
do
problem.
drive on a principle
Right.
here is rotating between voices so that we can hear some more, and we are at our time limit,
Right,
unfortunately, for this.
yes, I get that, but I'm just saying that it's something to consider. I'm not adding fire, I'm not adding like new problems to it, but I'm saying it's something to consider.
Yeah,
Why,
definitely.
why these problems have to be prioritized because of the history of this country, and we forget. You see, other countries have teach us a lesson to us.
Michael, we're not in the spot here.
I understand, but I'm saying
Yeah.
you might want to consider your own, your ancestry as well, sir. Thank you.
Yes, no, very true. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions, Michael. Really do I care about your voice and the things that you're contributing. But we were trying to get away from delivering chunks of speeches to things and get into looking at the effects of one problem on another. So thank you for participation. We got the poll up here that we're putting inside of this. Courtney, Bill, is this a logistical question? Or we've got our vote here. We do have a tie right now between 1 and 3.
I just have two inputs from the chat that I wanted to share.
All right.
From Arnold, I love the idea of overcoming historical amnesia. And also from Andy, our millennials, young voters.
There we go. All right. And Tonya, you had a thought. Is that before I'm going to close the poll here? Now, the way we handle ties in this process is whoever made the proposal gets to choose. So the votes were for position, equal votes for 1, 2, and 3. So Nicole, you can break the tie. Do you want to move it up to 1, 2, 1 or 2, or do you want to leave it at position 3?
I think it's appropriately placed at 3.
All right. Sounds good. Great. Thank you so much. All right, so now was the part that we very much wanted to get into here at the end, is to now finally be able to talk about solutions and brainstorm a few different things. So we're going to open up the window a little bit so that we're giving people a minute versus 30 seconds, because it's going to be a little bit harder to present ideas on solutions here. So here are the two parameters on top of this. The solution should aim to solve as many of these problems as possible. But if we can't solve all the problems, you can't make a higher order problem worse when solving a lower order problem. And so that might be a check that I make as we bring up the various different solutions that we have that are proposed up. So I'd love to hear from folks, and any ideas that you have. Give us a suggestion in a minute or so of what you think would be a good solution that would try to solve as many of these problems as possible in order. And I'll go through the panel first. And I see Tonya, you've got your hand up if you want to go ahead and chime in first.
Absolutely. And I'm going to thank Arnold for his comment in the chat. I agree with it. One of the things as I look at the prioritized problems that we have, I think the overarching theme or consensus we've come to tonight is big money is the problem in our politics. And in order to address that, we have got to legislate and regulate the big money out of politics. I so wish Congress would have the courage to do something about Citizens United. That's the only way we're going to get rid of that Supreme Court case that allows political action committees to donate as much money as they want, to spend as much money as they want to influence our campaigns. And I think if we start there, we'll see other reform that'll come through that will minimize the amount of money people are allowed to use in electioneering, and it might actually change our politics back to what we want to see.
All right, so we've got one voter suggestion for tackling Citizens United and trying to undo that. Andy.
I will offer 4 solutions at the state level that go from easiest to do next session to gonna take some time. The first one is to require that to get public funding, Maryland Public Television include all candidates from all parties in their coverage of elections and in their debates that they have. I think that begins to break down the access question that we've talked about a little bit. And I think it's a really easy thing that we could do in next year's budget hearing is say that Maryland Public Television has to provide equal access to the different parties and the different candidates. The second thing I think is that we can expand public financing to go to all roles or all state offices. So state delegate, state senate. We already have it for governor. We can do it for the other constitutional offices as well. The third thing is I think we need a constitutional amendment to allow citizen initiative so that we're not stuck allowing the supermajority Democrats in Annapolis to control everything in the state. And the fourth thing is I think we need to take advantage of our multi-member districts and figure out how to do proportional representation at the state level. I think if we do those things, we begin to counter the influences that money and politics have, even if we can't overturn Citizens United.
Thank you, Andy. All right, I'll give Kevin and Nicole an opportunity to chime in as panelists as well.
Yep. Yeah, I just want to put a ray of hope in there. And we've seen this at the national level and the local level. The most money doesn't always equal a win. So, there's still a lot that goes into running a campaign. Money's a big part of it. But I don't want anyone that's watching out there to get discouraged for running for office because they don't have immediate access to money. I have to agree with my colleague Andy here, is that if we are going to go the public financing route, it needs to be available to everyone at all levels, and it needs to have appropriate matching. And right now, again, our Board of Elections funds that through fines and bad actors. So that's a good thing. I think that we also need to open voting up to the folks that aren't participating, the franchise everyone's paying for. They need to have access to be able to vote for these candidates regardless of their party affiliation. And Maryland, unfortunately, is one of the worst offenders in the country for participation from outside party candidates. So, yes, great discussion tonight. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Kevin. Go for it, Nicole.
As far as, political solutions, I do choose to swim in my own swim lane and choose not to offer any in particular. Although as concerning bias, I am focusing really on the millennials and Zs to take care of that and, just evolve people with more education, more information, and more ability to critically think. I hope that Marylanders are able to learn these things and empower one another to do that. In addition, I hope that people are also willing to support their communities and their neighbor. I call it Maryland's hate culture. And I hope some of that goes away with some of the bigotry that has remained there for many, many years, 250 to be exact. And then we just keep on moving forward. And I'm putting that into the hands of our beautiful millennials and Zs, and hopefully some of those young Xers that haven't been brainwashed by some of the political propaganda in our state's capital, right outside of our nation's capital.
All right. Michael, and then Bill. Got 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. So what I propose is that, to get more people to vote and have more candidates to get more airtime, is that big corporations cannot continue to give unlimited amounts of donations to political candidates without accountability. The only way you could stop the corporate donors from having a lot of influence in state politics is gotta tax their donations and regulate donations at the same time. Because just regulating donations alone is not enough, because corporate donors can find any loopholes or work around the provisions. Hey, we don't have to report how we spend our money. So that's why taxing and regulating corporate donations is important. It's just like how some states tax and regulate marijuana to keep a balance. And two, there needs to be a publicly funded campaigns that could be used for mutual aid in the states, because a lot of residents who vote, yeah, they're facing a critical economic need. So that's something to consider and think about in the 21st century. And other countries have those models we can learn from about direct democracy, especially through electronic voting, and also keeping tabs on, and also having implement an electronic system to detect corporate donations. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
Two thoughts. First, I thoroughly endorse and support the idea of stronger regulation of money that goes into a candidate war chest. My concern, however, is as long as freedom of speech becomes a core value in this country, for people with a lot of money to express their freedom and their thoughts and be able to buy places to share those opinions. And I don't see how we regulate and change that. So that I see only some limits to limiting the influence of money.
All right. Any other hands? Any other thoughts, suggestions on solutions? All right. Let's pass it back on over to PJ. Go ahead, PJ. Bring us home.
Awesome. I just want to pause and thank all of the amazing discussion tonight, guys. Want to thank all four of our panelists who took time out of their nights, from their vacations at a conference. Like, guys, thank you for pulling this off. I mean, Andy, you're running a gubernatorial candidate campaign right now. Like, we know how busy everybody is. We appreciate your time tonight. Amazing, really powerful conversation. I think obviously some work to be done, but it's good to see kind of people across different spectrums looking at it from different angles, finding a lot that we can kind of dig into and agree on. So thank you for the audience participation tonight, and we hope to do more of these in the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.